final section of your paper two. It's a slightly smaller section, so this is only looking at 18 marks as opposed to the 35 marks that section A and section B hold. This means that you're going to be spending slightly less on this with regards to timings too. As you are not going to be having the 9 marker that you've had in section A and section B, that's an immediate chunk taken off, which is super. It means I would suggest if your standard time, as we've already said, about a mark a minute, so you're looking at about 18, 19 minutes on this. If you're an extra timer, I've worked that out to be about 23 minutes. So you've got just over your mark a minute, which again, hopefully will be more than enough time. So I can hear you're keen. What is it that's in this section? This again is slightly broken up, as I've alluded to before. The first part of this is generic. So all of you will have been taught a general overview of food, water, and energy specifically within the UK. It might have been that you had little bits and bobs added in outside of the UK, comparisons with other HICs or NEEs and LICs, but all of you will answer all of the questions in the first part. Generally speaking, again, not an absolute, but generally speaking, there's going to be some form of figure. They will ask you about a whole range of different questions. So make sure you go through and you get those answered. So it should and it will clearly say on the exam what you need to do. But if you're having a bit of a panic, then answer all of the questions to start with before you then make your choice. Once you've answered all of your generic questions, you then will tick whether you're going to do food, energy, or water. But I'll come on to that in a moment. So, what is it that's going to be in this kind of overall section to start with? And it's this idea of making sure that you have an idea about how water, energy, and food work in the UK, how it is we get all of those three things. Where do we get them supplied from? Is it always from the same place? Is it from different places? Are there areas that have a greater demand for some than others? Looking at it across the world as well, and this is what I was saying about the comparative element of it, is it that the world makes sure that everything is spread out fairly? We know that's not the case by virtue of the fact that we look at development and we have the stages of different development within the demographic transition model. So having an understanding of where there is more of certain things and where there are less of certain things, and an understanding of why that is the case. Similarly, if we're going to kind of break it down, and I'll go through a brief outline. So if we have a quick look at food in the UK to start with, it's this idea that once upon a time, we ate a very, very seasonal diet. So we ate very much, what we could grow, etc., etc. Whereas now we've moved away from that towards a diet where we can genuinely get whatever we want most times of the year. Linked into that is our carbon footprint and the idea that our carbon footprint is growing, because it's no longer a case of popping to the local farm shop to get your food or into your local town. It's a case of it's popped on an aeroplane and flown over. Any of you who did open days with me know that we do that activity, which demonstrates this hopefully really well. Linked into that, the idea of agriculture within the UK becoming more industrialised. It's much more of an agribusiness nowadays than it is linked directly into subsistence farming. So it's worthwhile just making sure you have an understanding of that. Secondly is water. So water in the UK, hopefully, again, the understanding that the western side of the UK is significantly wetter than the eastern side of the UK. We technically are in one of the driest parts of the UK, being up in East Anglia. The weather of the last few days would suggest that, although there is rain forecast for tonight, perhaps we shall see. But it's this idea that it doesn't mean that you drink more water if you're in the west and you drink less water if you're in the east. It's making sure you have an understanding of how water is managed within the UK. So this idea that the southeast, so London and the southeast, has the highest demand for water, and it also has the lowest amount of natural, one of the lowest amounts of naturally falling water. So how do we counteract that? It's the ideas of reservoirs. It's the ideas of water transfer schemes and such like. So just make sure that you've had a read through all of these different factors. If you're not sure about this, look at the revision guide, look at your notes, and just have a kind of a refresh of this. Link that as well. Just make sure you read through a little bit about pollution. So pollution is something that happens, but also how do we manage it in the UK? Is it that we're worried about the groundwater being polluted? Is it that we're worried about the surface water being polluted? Just make sure you kind of summarize that too. Final bit before we go into the specifics is energy in the UK. So having an understanding that the energy mix has changed. So once upon a time, we were very, very much, back in the 70s, hugely reliant on coal, oil, gas, etc. So the fossil fuels, and the idea now that that is moving forward. Okay, so it's moving away from non-renewable energy sources into renewable energy sources, into the likes of electric vehicles and such like. So make sure you understand that. Linked into the idea that the fossil fuels are not going to be there forever. They are running out. They are a finite energy source. So we in the UK are looking to very much counteract their usage by finding other ways and means of power. So things like the offshore wind farms, things like solar energy, all of those different bits and bobs. But just understanding that you've got to make sure that you can talk about the fact that there are government grants involved in these things, the fact that new houses have to adhere to different rules and regulations. So make sure you have a think about that. And on in the same breath, understanding the economic issues, the environmental issues that come about from the UK's energy usage, because it's not a case of we're all magical. Yes, we try, but there are things that can be done better and there are things that aren't quite so super. With regards to that, that's kind of the general overview. So all of you need to make sure that you have an understanding of that. This is where it then splits, because depending on which teacher you had dictates which topic areas you've looked at. We, as in my classes, have predominantly looked at food. Mr. Majid's classes have looked at energy, and Mr. Atkinson's classes have looked at water. All of them are absolutely fine. When you come to choose, you literally will just have to highlight which one you do. As I've already said, please do not go rogue in the final paper and think, oh yes, I can definitely do this. I'm sure you could have a really good shot, but the case studies that you need just aren't going to be there. So what I am going to do in this regard is I'm going to talk through a little bit about food, just because it's something that I've looked at, that we've looked at. If you need anything else specifically, then get in touch with me and I will try as best as I can to summarize that. As I've said, a couple of people have been in touch about some energy bits and bobs, and I will pop some information onto our chats so that you can use that. But anyway, I'll stop wittering on, well, needlessly. Here we go. So we'll launch into food now. So this is talking about the global scale. This is not just talking about the UK anymore. This is talking about how food is, or the supply of food is uneven throughout the world. It's the idea that some countries and some areas have got that their consumption rates are massive compared with some areas that just don't have that option. Please bear in mind that when we talk about consumption rates, it does vary depending on which country you're in, but don't make sweeping generalizations. So it's not a case of, well, this country, everyone in this country is obese, everyone in this country isn't, etc. There are always going to be extremes to every average, and we know this, but just make sure you have a look through where are the areas that have the greatest rates of consumption in the world, and where are the areas that are actually really, really lacking, because you've got to make sure that you can understand and talk about that. This idea also that the rate of food demand is increasing due to the population. The population is growing at an exponential rate. We do not have an exponential amount of food currently, so it's making sure that we are working in order to try and improve this. So this is where things like hydroponics, aeroponics, this idea of agribusiness as opposed to subsistence farming is coming in. So make sure your key terms and you are there and you understand what it is that you're actually talking about. Okay, so what else do we need to link in here? We need to link in things like food supply with human factors and physical factors. So what do I mean by that? So physical factors, I'm talking about things like climate. So how can climate affect your food supply? How can water stress? How can pests? All of those different kinds of things, diseases, how is that going to affect water supply? And then on the other side of it, human factors. So things like poverty, Things like technology, link in appropriate technology by all means. Things like conflict, how do those impact upon food supply in different areas? So have a look at that. Food insecurity and food security, which we've spoken a fair amount about as well. Make sure you understand the negative impacts of food insecurity. So things like famine, things like undernutrition, soil erosion, things like social unrest, rising prices, riots, all of those things we've got to make sure you understand. And it's not just a case of being able to list them, it's a case of being able to say, oh, yes, well, there was an example of famine in, I don't know, Somalia, for example, we could use that one, where best part of 250,000 people died. So just make sure you've got the key information there that you need to in order to be able to link in. Yes, you may not have a 9 marker to answer on this, but you are going to have a 6 marker that's going to ask you something to do with food. And there will be an expectation, not only from me, but also from the examiner, that you can talk about this in a case study format. Okay, let's carry on going. So new technologies, we've kind of alluded to this already, but you've got to make sure you have an understanding. I've shared with you an outline with kind of PowerPoint which summarizes these elements down, but also a couple of cheat sheets as they were. So please make sure you go back to our Teams chat in order that you can have a look and see what it is I'm jibber jabbering on about. But things you've got to make sure that you look at: the green revolution. What is it? How has it had an impact? Has it worked? Has it not worked? That links into things like GM crops. It's things like traditional crops versus organic crops. How does that have an impact on food supply? Look at that. Biotech. So this is looking at how can we increase yields? How can we actually grow all of our food and our goods in a way that maximizes the potential? We've already mentioned it, hydroponics and aeroponics. So this idea of growing crops without the need for soil. So using either water or using nutrients in the water. Think back to what we had a look at with regards to strawberries and Dyson and how they've come up with that absolutely phenomenal new technology on a large scale in order to be able to do that. But also think back to Almeria, where we looked at the large scale food production in southern Spain. So that's a really good example there. And finally, irrigation. How do we use irrigation to have a positive impact on crop yields? Because that's what we're talking about. We're looking at trying to increase the amount of food available to people. And however we want to look at it, we're going to have water. If you look at the Indus example with regards to a case study as well, that's another really good one. It's a one that doubles up as well, because you can use it from hot deserts and you can link it into food. So please make sure that you are using those elements. And final thing, kind of linked into this idea of increasing food supply, is appropriate technology. And remember, appropriate technology is different to just bog standard technology. It's technology that links directly into an area. So it's making sure that it's technology that local people can use, and they don't have to make sure they're phoning these massive TNCs every time a tap doesn't work. So have a look at those. The idea of, the water aid side of things. So water aid go out, they educate, and they make sure people can use it. With regards to case studies, there are loads and loads of case studies we can link into this, but I just want to make sure that you're looking at the key ones. So the ones on Teams that we spoke about, have a look at the large-scale food production in Almeria. I've done the A4 page, which goes through all of the smaller case studies too. You've got Somalia as your example for famine. Make sure you have a look at that. And then you've also got the Indus example as well, which kind of is a secondary one to Almeria. The final thing I'd like us just to have a look at is this idea of a sustainable food supply. Okay, so the idea that industrial agriculture has a negative impact on the environment. So how are we going to make it start working? So we're looking at low impact farming, things like organic, things like permaculture, things like urban farming initiatives. The Detroit example is a really good one there. This idea of moving away from we can eat whatever we want all the time, back to eating seasonally. reducing the amount of waste that we create, having a look at fish crops as well and meat and how we can make that last. And finally, agroforestry. Link in your agroforestry.